afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Grant Writing 102 workshop hosted by ANCA Center for Pandemic Response. My name is Mihaela, and I'm a program navigator with ANCA CPR. Quick agenda for today. We're going to go over some housekeeping for this Zoom call. I'll give a brief introduction to ANCA for anyone who's joining us for the first time, and then we'll move on to the main presentation. So a few notes before we get started. This event is being recorded and will be available on ANCA's YouTube channel following the session. We will also share the recording with all registered participants. We will be moving to some breakout sessions later on in the program. So the main presentation will be recorded and the main room will be recorded, but those breakout sessions will not be. If you'd like to update your name as it appears on Zoom or add your pronouns, you can click the participant button at the bottom of your screen and then select rename from the drop-down options next to your name. Also, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat if you'd like to do so. We do ask that participants remain muted during the main presentation. If you want to, you can type questions into the chat and then I'll keep track of them. There will be time set aside at the end for a general Q&A, but we also encourage you to unmute and join in the discussions in the breakout room. So there'll be lots of opportunity to discuss out loud then. So real quickly, a brief introduction to ANCA and the work that we do. Okay, so ANCA is a nonprofit that was established in 1955. We have about 30 staff now and we're based in Saranac Lake, but we serve the 14 northernmost counties of New York State. And we do that with the vision of a new economy that works for all. Our mission is to build prosperity across Northern New York, and we're focusing on creating and sustaining wealth and value in local communities. We do that across 4 main program areas, which are small businesses, food systems, clean energy, and the Adirondack Diversity Initiative. And many of you may know us through our Center for Pandemic Response program, which is part of our small business services. CPR has served as a single point of contact for businesses, nonprofits, and entrepreneurs to access programs and services provided by ANCA or throughout the region. And ANCA CPR is hosting this program. Okay, and with that, I'm going to hand things over to John Ignatowski, who's our grants advocate and coordinator, to get started on our main presentation.
Thank you, Mihaela. Hi, everybody. As Mihaela mentioned, I am the grants advocate and coordinator at ANCA, and I will be leading today's workshop. Grants 102 will be building off the material presented in Grants 101, which, if you haven't already, I would strongly recommend you to watch that. Grants 101, presented by our very own grants guru, Jen Perry, who's on with us today, explores the fundamentals of the grant writing process. Change slide, please. And then one more slide, Mihaela. Thank you. Grants 102 will be structured a bit differently than Grants 101. Instead of a lecture-styled format, Grants 102 is designed to be interactive, providing the opportunity for everyone here to ask questions and chat about their grant writing experiences. We have created 4 breakout sessions with different topics, as shown in the slide, and each breakout room will be staffed by someone at ANCA who possesses expertise in that topic. But before we open the breakout sessions, there are 2 things that I'm going to do. First, I'm going to briefly review the takeaways from Grants 101. And second, I'm going to open the floor for general questions. So let's start by reviewing some takeaways from Grants 101. Slide change, please. All right, here we go. Let's start with grant money is not free money. While you don't have to pay back a grant, there are other costs, primarily your time. So grant writing and grant management is time and resource intensive, and it's important for you to identify the capacity that you have for applying to and administering a grant. Second, it's later than you think to apply. Grants take time to apply to, and there can be elements that take weeks to accomplish, so it's best to start as early as possible. 3, read the grant guidance document and read it many times. Reading the guidance document frequently and carefully will ensure your grant is hitting the mark and will prevent surprises. 4th, denials are part of the journey to success. Follow up with the grantor for feedback and use the denial as an opportunity to learn how you can improve. And then lastly, not applying for a grant can also be the right decision. Although grant opportunities may seem tempting since there's money on the table, the effort may or may not be worth it. For example, the grant may not be completely aligned with your vision, or the requirements may be too onerous. The grant should complement your project and capacity well, rather than making you become something that you're not. While these are the major 5 takeaways, there's lots of other valuable information in Grants 101 that I'm unable to easily summarize. I would encourage everyone to watch it and rewatch it. I've also created an outline of Grants 101 that you can use as a reference document, and we'll be sharing that with you in our follow-up email after this presentation. Change slide, please. So we're setting aside some time right now for some general questions. I think we'll begin with a poll, though. Mihaela will be submitting a poll to all of you, and I think the first question will be, have you applied to a grant before? And if yes, have you been rejected from a grant before? And Mihaela, once you get a decent amount of answers, let me know what those totals are.
Great. So it looks like we've got everyone's answers in. So 86% have applied to a grant before, and of those, 70% have been rejected from a grant before.
Okay. Perfect. So with that information in mind, the first question I would like to ask all of you is, what do you find most difficult about the grant application process?
Folks, I'm going to give you the option to unmute right now so that you can speak up if you want to ask a question out loud. And if you prefer to type it in the chat, please feel free to do so, and I will read aloud your question.
And maybe it's worth it for me just to throw all the questions out there at once too. In addition to that question, if you were able to receive outside help, hypothetically, where would help be most useful? And do you have any stories to share about your own grant writing experiences?
And if folks need an icebreaker, perhaps one of our other staff wants to break the ice with one of these questions.
So I have, this is Heidi Holdreed. Can you hear me now?
Yes, Heidi, go ahead.
Okay, good. Yeah, it wouldn't let me speak earlier. So my difficulty was that we had a project that we couldn't afford unless we knew we would get the grant money. And it was a match. So it was risky because we went for it because we had to. Because the process has to already be underway for you to have the information that the grant writers need, or that the grant givers need. And so there was a leap of faith that we would qualify. We did on paper, but so maybe did a lot of other people. So when there's limited funds and you have more people applying who all qualify than there is money, you're really taking a chance to, that maybe you won't get the money, and now you've made a financial commitment that is more than you could afford. So that was my experience. We got the grant one time, and then we didn't get the grant another time. So that was tough.
Thanks for sharing that, Heidi. Any other questions, comments about the grant writing experience?
Brian, it looked like you had a question, Brian Wood, so
Yeah.
go ahead.
So, most difficult, I would say, is if you're working for an organization, a nonprofit, and you are one of, or in my case, the only full-time employee. So you're kind of doing all of the writing and the collection of data, the organization of data yourself. And in many of these cases, we're trying to do it to squeak out, major projects, but you're also, doing it to justify, in some cases, your own salary. And it's one of those, the trying to find like the sweet spot between costs and what the budget breakdown looks like. So I think that has been a unique challenge, definitely not a unique challenge, but it's been a challenge. Organizational help. I've reached out to other organizations that kind of support nonprofits and have kind of worked with an individual who's kind of helped me, steered me toward opportunities and been receptive to reviewing my writing and my budgets. So that feedback, just from having kind of someone as a peer collaborator from outside has been really helpful. And then stories, just I would reiterate that give yourself twice as much time as you think you need, because everything takes longer. And that you've had successes, but also, some of the bigger grants and the ones that are kind of connected to government funding take a whole lot of time. There's a whole lot of forms, a whole lot of spreadsheets you fill out, and it's great when it works out, but then it's if you spend a good chunk of several weeks putting it together, and in the end you don't get funding, that's a discouraging experience, because you invested, multiple weeks and many hours of your time and your salary to do that, and you end up kind of in the end backwards. So, yeah.
Thanks for sharing that, Brian. Danny, I see that your hand is up.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think one of the things that is most difficult in my experience from applying for grants has been that just like you would assume at this point that the applications are all going to be very similar. And I think if you're new to it, if you've ever done one before, one thing that just never ceases to amaze me is like how close all of the questions are, and then how different the data you need to answer them is. It's like almost that, but I need the demographic data in percentages, or I need a financial snapshot of my organization and not the project budget, or, I thought I had the answer to this and they're asking for something just a little bit different, or their priorities are just a little bit different. And I always, after having submitted a bajillion grants, always still underestimate the amount of time that takes and some of the nuanced details of those differences. I really appreciate outside help a lot, and lean on other nonprofit partners and other folks who have written grants. And but it's not always just the other folks who have written grants, but also outside help when you grant. Really experience having Data Development or Authority of the North Country oversee our reporting processes that we send into our grantors. So they look over our numbers and they look over our budget spend down and just kind of help us work those things out. So even though, we have a large organization, it is helpful to have another organization who's doing oversight to ensure that we're being fiscally responsible and dotting our I's and crossing our T's. And I also find and my last thing, any stories to share is that I would say that I really don't love writing grants by myself. I love doing it with a whole bunch of people, getting something started and having everybody just throw stuff on and clean it up, and utilizing different people's skill sets to be able to move the ball forward.
Thanks for sharing that, Danny. And I noticed, oh, sorry,
Oh,
Mihaela.
yeah, we do have a comment in the chat, which is what I find difficult is planning in the grant application for efficient assessment and reporting after a grant is awarded.
Do we have any additional questions or stories from our participants? I don't think I see any other hands raised unless I'm missing something, Mihaela.
Greg, I thought I saw your hand raised at one point, if you wanted to speak up and ask a question, but if you've changed your mind, that's completely fine.
Hello?
We can hear you, Greg.
Yeah, I'm promise I'm in a crowded space. I wasn't sure if you can hear me above the background noise, but I used to write small grants and they were so easy. When I actually wrote for a big grant, I was just devastated at the complexity and the amount of time we had to assemble a team. And it seemed to me like the grant was written by academics for academics, but the actual audience, of course, was farmers who were anything but academicians. And, it just seemed kind of like a crazy mismatch. I mean, if you're going to write a grant for a guy who spends 10 hours a day out in the fields, you want to make it accessible to that audience, not make it accessible to other academics. It just seemed to me like kind of a non sequitur, really. I think that people writing grant applications should be mindful of who their target audience is, not write it to be lauded by their peer group, but be actually accessible to the target audience, not each other. Thanks.
Thanks for sharing that one, Greg. That one really resonates with me too. As someone who reads through all these announcement opportunities, sometimes the language can feel more like jargon, and it feels more like a puzzle than it is like a pleasant reading experience. Anyone else before we introduce and discuss our different breakout session topics? Sounds like maybe it's time to talk about our breakout sessions then. Mihaela, do you mind switching slides again? And then we'll have, so what we'll do here is that each person who's leading a breakout session will introduce their section and make a pitch. So it looks like we have grant budgeting for businesses first. So Danny, the floor is yours.
Hey, so I'm Danny Delaney. I'm the Entrepreneurial Economy Program Director at ANCA. Written a lot of different grant budgets for different grants, really small ones, really big ones. And hopefully Kim Mannion will be back. She has another call to take, but she'll be back and maybe in that breakout session with me. I have a very silly list of questions and presentations, and that is really just focused on things I've done running in the past or things to think about. But really, I'm just there to answer questions and hope that I love to solve a problem or help find people to solve a problem. So if you're interested in having that kind of conversation about how to write a budget and what kind of things you should include and what to think about, I'd love to chat with you.
Great, thanks, Danny. And then our second breakout session will be writing a compelling narrative. Zach or Lauren.
I'll jump in, and if Lauren has anything to add here, I invite her to do so. I'm Zach Hobbs, Regional Advocacy and Workforce Development Coordinator at ANCA, and Lauren, who's our Small Business Services Coordinator, and I will be chatting about compelling narratives. And this is that storytelling piece of a grant, which might look like a bunch of questions where a grantor asks you to describe things, or it might be a prompt to just attach a letter sharing what you're going to do and any number of things in between. I suspect, based on some of the comments we just heard, that we're probably going to come up with more questions and challenges to address together than we are answers, solutions, and expertise. But hopefully we can work together to talk about some of our best practices. I have reviewed hundreds of millions of dollars worth of grant proposals in my time. Lauren probably feels like she's written and edited that many, but maybe a little bit less, but she is truly one of the most expert grant editors and focusers that I've ever worked with. So hopefully the two of us can give you some tips on how to break up a grant and craft a compelling narrative. And we can work together on some real life examples as a group. And also maybe come up with some ideas for how we can all work together to make sure that we're able to leverage successful grants through compelling narratives to bring some cash money into our region. So we look forward to chatting with folks. Lauren, anything else?
That's great. And thank you for the compliment. That was really nice. Hope to talk to some of you soon.
Great. Thanks, Zach. I will be leading the third breakout session, Techniques to Maximize Efficiency. So grant applications are often complex and have many moving parts, as we kind of mentioned in the question and answer session earlier. In my breakout session, I will provide some tips and techniques that will help you create an efficient workflow. The goal here is to make the application process more manageable with less stress and surprises. Do we have someone describing the lounge, which is breakout session number 4? So I can, Mihaela?
Sure. Yeah. So if you don't want to join any of those 3 breakout sessions, Jen Perry and I will be staying in this main room, aka the lounge, where you can ask sort of general questions or just hang out, take a break if you need to. And Jen, I'll let you add anything to that about your experience and what you'd be able to talk to folks about.
No, yeah, same. Basically, just an overflow. If you have questions that you didn't feel fit into any of the other categories, or if you're looking for maybe even a one-on-one consultation, getting into some weeds, we'll be here.
And as I mentioned earlier, Jen is a grants master, has secured a few $1 million in grants, and she led Grants 101. So definitely pick her brain. So I guess, Mihaela, do you want to describe how this is going to work? I hope those breakout sessions were informative and enjoyable. I think at this point, we can open up the floor to follow-up questions, general questions, comments. Feel free to raise your hand or jump right in. I guess we did a good job answering all the questions during the breakout session. Perfect.
And
That's
folks,
what we aim for.
if you have follow-up questions from your breakout session that you want to be able to follow up with the staff that you were talking to in the breakout session, we'll share out contact information and all of that afterwards. So if you were discussing something specific with them, you can continue that conversation if you need to.
Any final words from any of our breakout session leaders at all? Okay, well, I think that wraps things up. Thank you, everybody, for coming to Grants 102. Definitely great to meet all of you. And keep your eyes on our events page, because we will likely have events like this again in the future.
And if there was a breakout session you wanted to learn more about, like, we'd be happy. Like, if you're interested in budgeting, but you didn't get to go to the budgeting one, I'll hang out with you. Let me know, or whoever, you know.
All right, everybody, have a lovely afternoon, and hopefully we'll see you again soon. Take care.